Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmina Lazendic-Galloway, and I'm a research fellow at TU Innovation Space at Eindhoven University of Technology, and also senior adjunct research fellow at School of Physics and Astronomy at Monash University in Australia. And I'll be telling you today about how you can develop metacognition when you teach physics to your students. So one of the things that I find really fascinating is to first understand that not all learners are the same as us, the experts. And so we have basically a distinction between novice and expert learners in terms of how we collect information and how we process information. And this is just a quick table to give you some ideas. But what I find fascinating is this ability of experts that novices don't have, and that's the willingness to evaluate our own thinking. This is something we take for granted now as experts, but as students, as novices, need to be trained and taught how to do this. So another thing that I learned through reading educational literature is that, especially for physics, students, very good students, tend to recognize the type of the problem. So it's there's a plug and chug attitude sometimes where you know this equation and then you just go through all of the possibilities and then you just plug in the numbers and you get some result. Another one the students use is pattern matching. When they see a question like a ball is rolling down the slope, they go, oh, that's friction problem. And so then just without really thinking through, go and grab first equation to do the friction and try to calculate the problem there. But really what they need to think about is the overarching problem to identify what's known, what's unknown, what's given, what's asked, because you can have, ball rolling down the slope, but you're actually calculating many other things. So another interesting paper that came across is that talks about how we develop evaluative judgment in our students. And this is applicable across all the learning, not just in physics. But in physics in particular, because it does matter what those numbers mean. And so how can students say the quality of their work and not rely just on our feedback to tell them that that solution is correct or not? So we need to give them a lot of occasions for practice. We need to role model our thinking. And we also need to embed that in assignments so that they see that that's a valuable skill to have. So one way to do it is obviously to have a lot of self-assessment for practice, but then also as a part of the overarching assessment, to give them clear assessment criteria, because by setting up assessment criteria, we signal to students what matters in their learning. Because if we say your critical thinking is important, but we never actually give them mark for that component, they won't see it as valuable. So they will actually put a lot of time in kind of drills and other things rather than thinking about, slower and deeper. And we have to be very specific because, again, from the literature, we know that contextualized learning is usually the good start when you come with novices, and then it can be more abstract. But if it's very specific, then it helps them to understand different elements of this metacognition. So we need to model how is that done. We need to give a very precise instruction. We need to give them a lot of practice, and we need to give them these opportunities while they're with us, but also at home practicing, and also with other students through peer learning. So the context in which I've done some of these sort of innovations is at our PACE studios at Monash University. We call them PACE because they stand for Physics and Astronomy Collaborative Learning Environment. These are basically studios where we can put 100 or so students. They're based on scale-up model from North Carolina University. And this is an example how, we have this active learning, not anymore just sort of lectures and labs, but we have these workshops and labs where we intertwine theory and practice. So I was inspired by Eric Mazur's work. He came to Australia a while ago and gave excellent talk as usual. And he showed how he implemented basically peer learning, where students are given problem sets to do it at home. But then when they come to classroom, they basically peer mark each other's work, and they find these mistakes. Instead of being given solutions or being marked just by the lecturer or tutor, they actually have to recognize these errors in thinking themselves, and then sort of mark them. If their homework is done in black ink, they have to do it in red. So then what's marked is not just their work, but also this metacognition. So I tried to replicate this in a slightly different way. So we started this active learning where we have lectorials instead of lectures. And this is what we talked about concept. We have some problem sets and theory discussions. And then they have labs in which they're doing experiments. So the main innovation was that in labs, where normally they would have a lab report, which was basically marked a lot of on technicalities, and students really spent this appropriate amount of time on doing something easy just because they can control the learning and control the outcome. but really didn't connect it with theory, didn't connect it with concept. So what I've done is basically let them have the labs. They shortened a little bit to 2 hours, and it was all just about data collection and that kind of practical side of experimentation. Then when they go home, they have 2 days to kind of digest that, and then we open and ask them for a report. So as I said, in this process, we try to tackle 2 types of feedback. One is the intrinsic feedback, through which student will be able to develop this evaluative judgment, and another one, external feedback that comes from us as instructors. So in the first step, they have to submit their answers. So let's say if the lab is on Wednesday, on Friday, they will have due this report to submit, and the report will be tagged according to the skill we want that particular question to tackle, and it will be marked on demonstrated or mastered or developmental level. So students will submit that, let's say, by Friday night, and then as the deadline for that has finished, what opens up is the expert report. So then students have to, and this is just an example, so they could use equation, they could use graphs, they have to obviously present data from their own lab work. And these questions are tagged, as I mentioned. They will have experimental skills maybe, or technical analysis, or synthesizing knowledge, or critical thinking. So again, this is to help them understand that the process is often the same. The topic might be different. It could be Newtonian mechanics one week, and it could be optics next week, but the style of thinking is the same. So then the second step is that after that Friday evening, then the expert report opens. And so there they can see our answers to this report. And by Sunday night, they have to now submit a reflection report. And so basically they have to say, what's the difference between what we said as experts and what they said as novice learners? So in this way, we actually provide feedback faster because they can compare, they can see the right answer straight away. So it gives that kind of more fresher feedback. But at the same time, we don't stop learning just at that moment like we would in the past. We actually ask for that, this is the feedback. Now, how are you going to act on that feedback? So this is extra step that we didn't require before, but it really helps to develop this metacognition. And these reflection questions have the same tags. And basically we ask them, how does your answer compare? And they can't just say, well, your one is longer, mine is shorter. I'll try and write more. They can't be superficial. They actually have to go down into the concept, and we guide them because this is first year students, and for them this is not very clear, so they require a lot of guidance and scaffolding, and then they submit that. So then we mark the initial report and this reflected report, and again this is marked on the level. So we start with not demonstrated, then developing, and then demonstrated and mastered. So we try to encourage this learning for mastery rather than learning for marks. And this really changed the attitude of students. Instead of coming and saying, why did I lose 1 mark here? They come and say, what do I need to do to demonstrate to you that I know this? And so our rubric is pretty simple. And it also helps our TAs to mark this, because in the past, if they worry about, well, is this answer 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 5? Now they don't have to worry about that because the criteria is much clearer and much easier to gauge. So did this work in the end? So we have evaluations that come every year at the end of the semester, and the students are basically asked a bunch of multiple choice questions, but they ask 2 open-ended questions. First one is, which aspect of the unit you find the most effective? And the other one is, would you suggest any changes to enhance this unit in the future? And so we coded these answers. So 2016 is still the traditional way we were teaching the unit. And then in 2017 is when we introduced these changes. And we done inductive coding. So the most frequent things mentioned as effective were labs in 2016. And there was no lab reports then, but there was lab notebooks then, which were marked, but they were not mentioned. They were not mentioned as the most effective way of learning. And then there were tutorials, obviously, interactive lectures and lectorias, and then pre-lecture videos, which we introduced in 2017 when we flipped. So they were not present in 2016. And so as you can see from 2017 and 18, labs were still considered the most effective component of the unit. And now lab reports are finally mentioned as well. So for the first time, students are actually seeing the value of this kind of activity rather than before thinking, oh, this is just something to get a mark. And, it doesn't affect me. It doesn't help me learn things otherwise. And so, of course, then we also have the pre-lecture videos because we flipped our classroom that year. So obviously, students enjoyed those videos as well. And in terms of what needs to be improved, the students mentioned in 2016 that labs are too short. So they were 3 hours then, and they continue to have similar comments in 2017 and 18. And we know that's usually the issue because some students always need a little bit extra time. Sometimes things can be too hectic in labs. There was an issue about lab groups in 2016. The students didn't really like staying with one TA for a long time or with the same group of students, but that has gone away in 2017 and 18 because now they can build a much more meaningful relationship because they have this conversation around these sort of tags and these skills that we're trying to teach them. And then they required more time to complete their reports in reflections. So this was only in 2017, and we took that feedback on board and streamlined process a little bit. So that has gone away in 2018. There was no issues like that. And then we have some issues around moderating TA marking, which was particularly important once we introduced this new method, just because marks became much more meaningful rather than, well, it's just, 18 out of 20 for lab. It's not a big deal. So the students really started to care about the differences, whether they were given demonstrated or mastered. They really felt that kind of badge of honor and really wanted to make sure that marking and the criteria are same across TAs. And we had 20 TAs, so there's a lot of training that we need to do in that respect. And then marking criteria can be somewhat vague, and that's a common complaint that we have sometimes from students. But as I said, criteria can be sometimes, rubrics can be sometimes too specific, and students will then produce to the recipe. And here it was more because it was about metacognition. It was more about them understanding what particular questions are important to address. And of course, there was a lot of time in labs to discuss that with their TAs. And then, of course, they wanted some more explanation in labs. And again, it shows, it's kind of, in a negative part, but we see it as a positive because before they couldn't wait to, just leave the labs. And now they actually want to discuss things more with TAs. They saw this link between theory and practice, and they, stayed there and wanted to continue these discussions. So from the comments that they made, I picked a few to kind of illustrate some of the thinking behind these comments. One student said the feedback method was very impressive because we can find out our own weaknesses and strengths in this unit. And this is what this method was designed for. And then another one says, I thought it was great that a lot of our in-class assessment had a focus on demonstrating that we were in the process of learning the material. So for the first time, they started to feel like we are not just punishing them for, not knowing and testing them all the time, but we actually encouraging this idea that you are learning stuff. So, the ability that they didn't have to be correct, because we say, if you made mistakes in your initial report and then in reflection, you understand where that mistake comes from. Well, you've done the learning, so you can get full marks for your reflection, although you made some mistakes in your initial report. And they really liked that. They felt it was kind of like reward and not punishment. There were some students that didn't find this very exciting and said, cancel reflection reports. We are scientists, not writers. And of course, that's completely understandable. Some students, especially in physics, they really like that kind of mathematical expression and, numerical use. And so they didn't like them. But of course, we know from literature and from many research that writing is important. And of course, in all domains of life, in all professions, you do communicate. So, we can't always do what students want, and we can gently encourage them to and show them benefit of some of that kind of assessment. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and please feel free to reach out for any questions and discussions.